Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Friday, April 24th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, Democratic State Representative Larry Springer, who voted for Washington's new income tax, despite some major concerns with the legislation, in an exclusive interview with the Center Square. He is the first Democrat to speak with us on the record since revelations came out this week, and my colleague TJ Martinell received exclusive documents from the Office of Attorney General Nick Brown and correspondence with crafters of the income tax and the main sponsor, Senator Jamie Peterson, kind of collaborating on how to craft this whole thing. Whether or not there's anything illegal about those collaborations remains to be seen, or whether it was just regular correspondence between lawmakers and the AG's office. But Representative Springer has some very pointed thoughts on that. He's got some big concerns about the current form of the income tax, but again, voted for it. So we're going to weigh into that. And again, I'm excited to share that because this is, again, the first Democrat who this week has been willing to speak with us on the record. And then Moody's yesterday, Thursday of this week, downgraded Washington's credit rating. One of many reasons why Senator Drew McCune, Republican from Shelton, says we better get lawmakers back into special session and soon. He's calling for a session this summer, says that we need to fix what's broken. Among his major concerns is to kill the Climate Commitment Act now. I had a conversation with him today about that. Again, urging for a special session, basically suggesting we cannot wait until the 2027 legislative session to deal with some of these things. Of course, we've got the major increase in gas prices, not just CCA related. We've got issues in the Middle East, of course, and other factors there. But he is concerned. And with that, in conjunction with the Moody's downgrading for our credit rating in the state, and if you've received a utility bill recently from PSC or another utility provider that you have, you probably know that your rates, if they haven't already gone up, they are about to go up big time. And Senator McCune believes that if we roll back the CCA and do some other things for transparency on some of these utility rate increases, that's going to be a big benefit. And it will be imperative, he says, to adjust those things before the next legislative session. And then finally, a flag controversy brewing for years in the Tri-Cities. There was a significant vote taken this week and a new policy in the Kennewick School District concerning flags. We're not just talking about the American flag. We're talking about all those other flags that show up in your kids' classrooms, including the gay pride flag. A big vote and a controversy that has now been resolved, at least in the Kennewick School District, and a conversation with that school district president coming up in today's episode. So let's dive in. A Democratic lawmaker who voted in support of Washington's new income tax is speaking out about this week's revelations of emails that show coordination between the Office of Attorney General Nick Brown and crafters of the legislation for a millionaires tax, Senate Bill 6346. Now, as reported by the Center Square, those documents show efforts to basically skirt a vote of the people and to push the issue before the state Supreme Court in hopes of overturning more than 90 years of legal precedents. Representative Larry Springer is the representative I am speaking with, and you're going to see that conversation in just a moment. You may recall he supported the bill as passed, but he was also the first lawmaker to speak out while it was being debated during the legislative session to basically come out and say, there's no way that this is going to be just a tax on millionaires. He received a lot of pushback for that. In fact, in our conversation that we had Thursday night, he told me I've still got the scars to prove that I was the first to come out on this. He took a lot of heat, but he stands by what he said then and now, that this eventually will be a tax on all income earners in the state of Washington.
I think that probably is. There's two things there's more than two things that work, but two that come to mind is, first of all, any given legislature that passes legislation cannot bind the next legislature. They can do whatever they want. No matter what we say about it shall only be on incomes over $1 million, the next legislature can change that pretty easily. So just from the pure process of legislators being convened, there's never going to be a guarantee. That said, we have talked about an income tax as a much more progressive, fair way of taxing, raising revenue in this state for, well, literally for 30, 40 years. And I happen to believe that an income tax is a more fair, equitable, progressive tax. So if you believe that, then a progressive income tax, you can't call it progressive if it only applies to, some small class of people. That's not progressive, that's regressive. And so the notion that this could be expanded to others, there's, the precedent at the federal income tax level, there are thresholds, and they just, they're lowered, raised as the legislatures deem fit. But what I hope happens as a result of this is that we take a really careful look at the two most regressive taxes we have, sales tax and the B&O tax. And in both of those cases, we at least gestured that we need to deal with those. That's what I requested specifically to support an income tax, a millionaire's income tax, is that there be a reduction in the B&O tax. There has been one. It's not as big as I would like, but it was a step in the right direction. And that there be a reduction in the sales tax. We did that as well. Again, not as much as I would like, but it was a step in the right direction. So I think we have set the stage for a robust conversation about the degree to which our revenue should be based, at least in part, on an income tax and less so on B&O and sales.
Now, Representative Springer owned a small business, a wine shop in downtown Kirkland, until he and his wife sold that business off a couple of years ago. But he says he still has major concerns about the impact of the income tax on small business owners. He told me he pushed for some changes before the bill was finally adopted with majority leaders. He said he hoped to have like a 5-year rolling average of income earnings for small businesses, such that, you could take a couple of years of losses and then you have a good year. He said that shouldn't come back to bite you. You should be able to roll that over. A couple of bad years, now I've got a good year. Doesn't mean I'm a millionaire this year, right? And shouldn't have to pay into the new millionaires tax. But that was to no avail.
That's one of my major concerns, actually, that was not adequately addressed. One, because I've had my own business for 42 years and it was an S corporation, so I have pass-through income that shows up on my income tax every year. Frankly, we sold the business 2 years ago, so I don't anymore. But for those 40 years, there was a line on my income tax return that said net profit, net income, or net loss. And one of the things that I argued about, and I hope the legislature will take into consideration if they, however this is, the Supreme Court determines its legality, is the notion that if you are going to include pass-through income from an S corporation, for example, that income should be subject to deductions for the cost of business. So if I'm going to be taxed on the profit that my store made, I get to subtract the cost of all the wine I had to buy before I could sell it. That's the way the federal code is written. So hopefully that will be something that the future legislature will take into consideration because it's a big deal. And I am sympathetic. I'm not sure exactly know how to deal with you have 2 or 3 bad years and then you have a really good year and you get dinged. We tried doing a look back of, I think it started out at 5 years, do a 5-year rolling average.
Yeah.
I would support that. I think that's a really good idea. It had too big a fiscal impact for some of my colleagues to withstand, so they didn't accept it.
Larry Springer told me he did support alternate legislation to require a vote of the people to have a say in this, to amend the Constitution. Otherwise, you shouldn't be able to just pass this unconstitutional income tax. There was alternative legislation offered by Representative Amy Wallen. He said he would have supported that. That never got a hearing. The majority would not hear that, he said. Now, he is not seeking reelection. Representative Larry Springer is not seeking reelection. That may be why he's more than willing to talk to us on the record. As I mentioned, we have reached out to many Democrats this week asking for comments since these documents came out from the AG's office showing this, correlation between how they were responding to sponsors of the income tax. He was, again, the only one who's been willing to speak with us on the record. But one other note I wanted to bring to your attention, and we'll put up a graphic here. There was an article this week from GeekWire. In fact, it was just yesterday from Nick Hanauer, Seattle entrepreneur, Democrat, venture capitalist, founder of Civic Ventures. He was responding to another op-ed this week, and he wrote this on GeekWire. We'll put this up. Recent efforts to make Washington the least attractive place in the country for wealthy citizens are producing a stampede to other states. Virtually every wealthy friend I have has either left or is planning to. It is a catastrophe. That from Nick Hanauer. Of course, he's sponsored many Democrat candidates' campaign efforts. And so this is a pretty remarkable thing. You may recall that Brian Haywood, during his testimony against the millionaires tax in Olympia this session, brought up Nick Hanauer and said, guys like him are leaving. There was a lot of pushback saying he's not going anywhere. So him coming out with this op-ed in GeekWire this week is confirmation that Haywood was right, and that wealthy entrepreneurs like Nick Hanauer may in fact be leaving the state, and this income tax might be the final straw. Now, on Friday, State Senator Drew McCune of Shelton issued a formal demand for an immediate special session of the state legislature. He wants to address the compounding effects of skyrocketing fuel prices, if you filled up at the gas pump this week, hidden utility taxes, if you've recently received notice from your utility provider, PSC or otherwise, that your rates are going up big time, and then looming double-digit rate hikes for other utility-related expenses. So he is the Senate Republican caucus deputy leader. So he pointed to a perfect storm, he says, of rising costs and fiscal mismanagement. That's his interpretation. And recent filings showing all these utility companies jacking up rates and blaming things like the Climate Commitment Act. He says we cannot wait until the 2027 session to get back in and fix some of these things. He is asking Governor Bob Ferguson to convene a special session this summer, July, to go back in and deal with some of these things now. Here is part of my conversation today with Senator Drew McCune.
Washington families are hurting under this program, which a lot of it's direct result of the CCA, the Climate Commitment Act. Obviously there's issues going on in the Middle East which affect our prices at the pump, but for us it's compounded because of the additional tax and regulatory burden we have in this state. So it's expensive to get to your job, it's expensive to get home, and now when you get home and you're utilizing your energy, and Puget Sound Energy increased your rates 20%. All of this is just compounding and making it harder and harder for families to make ends meet. And I'm hearing directly from my own constituents on how astronomical those increases have been for them. It is time that this state pulls its head out of the sand and addresses these issues and not do things from the viewpoint of wanting to score their progressive political points. Because you know what, in doing that, you're destroying families. Because it's having a serious economic impact. But there's two other things that have come up, or three really, in the last this past week. In addition to the energy, yesterday Moody's downgraded our state's debt and put us on a negative outlook. That's not good. They're citing, here you have an independent rating agency that if they did this to a public company, and they do this to publicly traded companies when their finances are out of order, when they give them a downgrade or put them on watch, that spikes the interest rates on future loans or debts that they have to do. But it also signals to the overall market that, hey, there's something wrong here. Well, that's what they just did with our state. They said there's something fundamentally wrong with the economics in Washington State in terms of our government and our budget. We can't ignore that. That has a real consequence. It'll have an impact on future transportation projects when we put bonds to market, because we're going to be paying a higher interest rate. Oh, but guess what? We've also got another issue that's creeping up on us. The unemployment insurance fund that's administered by ESD. I just got a report that I read this morning that they're projected to not have enough solvency beyond 6 months come September, which then triggers the need to have, by their analysis, to have an additional surcharge tax on unemployment insurance benefits. That's a direct impact to employers and employees that have jobs. They're also predicting an increase in unemployment benefits because we're seeing an uptick in our state of job losses. Microsoft just announced yesterday a buyout of a number of folks. You're seeing it with some other companies as well. We've seen the exit of some from this state. I mean, hello, let's wake up. I can't believe, when you look at the governor's inaugural speech and the moderate tone he struck then, and that was the last we ever saw that, and the pendulum went far left. And and it's been a spending binge like you can't believe.
Now, Senator McEwen told me he's not holding his breath, that Governor Ferguson will respond to say, hey, you're right. We better get back in session and deal with this. We can't wait. But he believes now is the time to start calling attention to this. It's an election year. He brought that up as well. So he said, I know that even members of his own party are not going to be anxious to be, brought back into special session and brought off the campaign trail. But he wants people to pay attention to this right now. He's sounding the alarm and hopes people are going to pay attention and kind of look ahead to where we are headed. You recall this week we got some notes out as well from Washington, unemployment rates going up. And there's a lot of concern about the direction of where things are economically for the state of Washington. Now, finally, the Kennewick School Board this week passed a new policy that is going to limit how teachers and staff can display non-American flags on campus. It was a 3-2 vote that passed on Wednesday night with President Gabe Galbraith, who you'll see from in a moment here, the Vice President, Micah Valentine, who's really been the one who's championed this issue for the last few years, and then also board member Josh Miller in support. On the other side, board members Mike Connors and Brittany Gledhill opposed to this. I did reach out to both of them. Neither responded today to my request for comment. But this new policy is going to restrict how political flags, including those representing any political party, movements, candidates, what have you, can be displayed outside the school or inside a classroom. So unless they're used temporarily for educational purposes, say a teacher is teaching on something in particular, or a student's doing some sort of a presentation where they need to show a particular flag as part of that presentation, you can't put that up in the flag. And his take, the president's Gabe Galbraith's take, is we just need to get back to the basics. We need to get all the rest of this out of the classroom and let the kids focus on learning. So he's hoping this could be the final issue or the final conversation piece on this issue, which has been about 5 years in the making in the Kennewick School District. Here's part of my conversation with Kennewick School Board President Gabe Galbraith.
We don't need non-educational stuff in the classroom that could be distracting. And to your point, you walk into a class and you see a flag or a banner or something on the wall that is completely opposite of your ideals or whatever. Like, you instantly get a feeling of maybe discomfort or whatever, right? And so again, this policy doesn't restrict student free speech like people came and said. It doesn't restrict teacher free speech. Everyone still has a First Amendment. And it doesn't ban anything. What we're saying is, if you're using a flag, poster, banner, anything like that, you could use that on a temporary basis, but not permanently, right? So if you're doing a lesson in history from any certain time and you need a flag to help with your delivery of that lesson, then a teacher could have a Black Panthers flag, a pride flag, a Blue Lives Matter flag, a Don't Tread on Me flag, whatever enhances that lesson. But then that's it. It doesn't need to be displayed permanently on the wall. And I think people need to look a little bit into the future as well. Like we're going in. I mean, things are obviously pretty divisive. We're going into a big, midterm election and those things, and so we just want to make sure that things aren't coming up, now or in the future. And we don't know what's going to happen the end of this year, next year, 5 years from now when it comes to any uprising of movements and those kind of things. But we're just saying, look, we don't need that in the classroom. Teach our kids, love our kids, create a safe space for them. We don't need all the other extra stuff in there.
Now, the specifics on how this policy will be implemented is going to be left up to school administrators, like principals in individual buildings, and likely not to be really enforced, he said, until the 26-27 school year, because we're nearing the end of this school year already. He said if there's still flags up in classrooms, teachers that are out of compliance, they're not going to make a big issue out of that. He's hoping there will be some immediate, response to this, but he said it's not going to be an enforcement issue probably until going into the next school issue. So that is a wrap on today's episode and the week's episodes of Washington in Focus Daily. It is April 24th, 2026. As always, thank you for watching. Hope you have a blessed weekend. Enjoy some time with friends and family, and we'll see you next week.